Okay, we'll start with this. Saunders. Canelo had biggest problem with Lara. I'm slicker. I haven't ever shown my best. People think fighting David Lemieux was good, but I remember. I'll never forget it. I walked to the ring that night thinking, this ain't Golovkin though. I know there's another 30% left in me. The only time it will come out is when I'm physically at my best and when it's put on me. Only then will you see what I've got and what I haven't got, Saunders told Boxing News. I always said, the performance that night was good to get me noticed, but it wasn't good for business. Look at Canelo. The biggest problem he ever had in the ring was with Estrada, who was a slick boxer. To be honest, I think I'm slicker than Lara. I thought he nicked their fight. My style can be bad for business for them who want opponents who are all action and want to stand in front of Canelo and get lumps knocked off them. But I'm not really about that. I've always had it drummed into me since I was a kid that it's about hit and not get hit. If that doesn't suit their Mexican style, then I'm not going to change it for them. I'll prove I'm the best if you give me the chance. But I'm not going to stand there and let you knock lumps out of me. Now, I'm sure that there are Canelo Alvarez fans out there that are listening to this and shaking their fists at the sky, cursing the name of Billy Joe Saunders, saying he's full of shit and he's irrelevant, this, that, and the other. But I'll remind you that these comments coming from Billy Joe Saunders, they're coming for a reason, and they have a lot to do with what Golden Boy's president, Eric Gomez, said way back when in 2017. You see, after Billy Joe Saunders had beat David Lemieux in 2017, Eric Gomez was quoted as saying that Billy Joe Saunders is a runner, and he's the one who likened him to Lara. So if Billy Joe Saunders is making a connection between how he fights, how Lara fights, and how that fight played out with Canelo, a controversial fight, a fight that there are people out there that will tell you Lara should have got the nod, Lara should have got the decision. If you're seeing this, it's not for no reason. At least some part of it is fueled by Eric Gomez and Golden Promotions themselves. That motherfucker didn't really have to say that shit. Point blank, period. He didn't have to say that shit, and he didn't have to make that connection to Lara. But because he did, that opened the door for Billy Joe Saunders to sit here today saying what he's saying. Understand something about Billy Joe Saunders' performance over David Lemieux. That was a dominant showing. People tend to forget how they felt before a fight based on how the fight plays out. They tend to forget that there were a lot of people out there that were picking David Lemieux to knock out Billy Joe Saunders. There were a lot of people that were not convinced that Billy Joe Saunders had what it took to win that fight.
They thought he was going to get knocked out.
I wasn't one of those people. I picked Billy Joe Saunders to win that fight given his style, because styles, after all, make fights. I'll leave the link to that video in the description box. I'll leave the link to that old prediction video. Now back to the point. The reason I highlight Billy Joe Saunders' performance, and that it was a good performance, the reason I highlight it is so that you can get an idea how it might look to Billy Joe Saunders, that after a very good performance, the people over there at Golden Boy are saying that they don't want their fighter fighting this fighter. They're calling him a runner, they're likening him to Lara, and how likening him to an opponent that gave Canelo problems might give Billy Joe Saunders the impression that you guys are afraid to make that fight. Because if you think that I'm like Lara, well, Lara's a guy who some people thought beat Canelo and got robbed. So you must be afraid that the same thing is going to happen if I fight Canelo. That maybe you can get the judges to score it for your boy, but what people are going to be saying after the fight is that I'm the guy that won. In other words, Eric Gomez and his comments might be a big part of the reason that Billy Joe Saunders is saying what he's saying. So if you want to be mad at somebody, you really should be mad at Eric Gomez, because he never should have said that shit in the first place. You're giving people the wrong impression.
Calling him a runner.
Now, a Billy Joe Saunders versus Canelo Alvarez fight. Let's think about that for a second. I don't want to get too deep into it because I don't even view that fight as being very likely to get made, given all the recent news that's floating around. That Billy Joe Saunders, among other fighters, may be going to the top-ranked side of the street, that he may strike a deal similar to the deal that Tyson Fury just struck, among others. So that kind of hampers whether or not you could see a Canelo Alvarez versus Billy Joe Saunders fight when there are already so many guys on Canelo's side of the street that he wouldn't have any problems fighting. There's no shortage of people that want a Canelo Alvarez fight, and there's no shortage of people that would be willing to cross the street for a Canelo Alvarez fight. But at the end of the day, if Billy Joe Saunders strikes a deal with the people over there at ESPN, that is a bit of a hindrance. That is a bit of an obstacle. An obstacle that a lot of guys like Demetrius Andrade, an obstacle that a lot of guys like Jaime Munguia, Triple G, several others, they don't have that obstacle because they're already on the same side of the street as Canelo. That's why I don't really want to spend too much time on it. But the way you got to look at a Canelo Alvarez versus Billy Joe Saunders fight is as a fight that is not necessarily visually appealing. Understand that Billy Joe Saunders, his style, lives somewhere between a boxer puncher and a pure boxer. This is a very hit and not get hit, lateral movement kind of guy. And when you put that kind of a style that can sometimes be economic, when you put that kind of a style in there with a counter-punching style, a guy like Canelo who works off what the other guy is doing.
His aggression.
It's a counter-punching style. Remember that. If you got a guy that doesn't throw that many punches, and then you got the other guy who works off of what he's doing, then you get a fight that really isn't that appealing, that the action may be far and few, like it was in the Lara versus Canelo Alvarez fight. So with those things in mind, you have to realize that while a fight between Billy and Canelo would still be a high-level fight because they're both skilled fighters, in the entertainment value department, it may not yield much. Because if Canelo's got to work off what Billy's doing, and Billy's economic and defensively minded, then you're not going to see a lot of punches get thrown. You're just not. Because if you're working off what Billy's doing, and Billy's not doing much but moving around the ring, if you're working around what Billy's doing, and Billy's not doing much, then you, in turn, aren't doing much, and the fans end up with a bit of a snoozer. I don't think the people over there at Golden Boy want Canelo Alvarez, especially at this point, associated with lackluster performances. And I'll say that if Billy Joe Saunders has started mentioning the name of Canelo Alvarez again, it's likely because the situation they had laid out for him not that long ago, it may not be panning out. You know, Billy Joe Saunders was supposedly going to go to 168 pounds, start campaigning as a super middleweight against Isufi. That was going to be his debut, and that debut was supposed to be for what was the vacant WBO title. But as I reported before, apparently Zurdo Ramirez still has intentions of holding on to that title, even though he's debuting as a light heavyweight. So where does that leave Billy Joe Saunders? I'll tell you where it leaves him. It leaves him with an opponent that's quite unheralded, and their fight wouldn't be for a title, making you wonder, then what's the point in the fight? Why go up there at all? It's not for a title, and we all know the middleweight division is a hotter division than the super middleweight division, so it puts Billy in a place where he needs to attach himself to something that's going on, because he's a bit of a transient. You know, he'll come in, he'll have a good performance, then you won't see him for a while. I think that the only real reason that Billy Joe Saunders is even mentioning the name of Canelo Alvarez at this point is because the plan that they had for him, it didn't work out. So now you got to get back to bringing up the same old names, same old shit in fights that may or may not happen, because, well, if you end up on the ESPN side of the street, that puts you a little further away from Canelo Alvarez. That doesn't mean that the fight's not possible. That doesn't mean it's not something you can't work towards, but you would be further away from a Canelo fight than all them guys they got over there at the Zone. So, you know, I get where Billy's coming from. I understand what he's saying, and I do think that there's a bit of truth in it, a bit. But at the end of the day, it's a non-issue, because Canelo's got any variety of options, so many that you're indistinguishable from any of them. If anything, you don't have an incentive for him. What does Canelo Alvarez get out of fighting you? What do you bring for him? I'll tell you that Billy Joe Saunders' best bet is to see about an Andrade fight. See if you can get your old world title back so that maybe you have something that Canelo Alvarez might want. Because right now, you ain't got nothing for him. In other news, women's WBA light flyweight champion Jessica Bopp posted this image via her Instagram with a caption that reads, "La espero, la reto a cualquiera de las dos. Marlene Esparza, Cenicia Superbad. A vos, Marlene, ya te gané, y vos, Cenicia. Espero respuestas." In other words, Jessica Bopp, the WBA light flyweight champion, is issuing out a challenge to either Marlene Esparza or Cenicia Estrada. And I'll tell you that this is the breath of fresh air that women's boxing provides. That there's a lot more gamesmanship from the established champions. That these champions are more willing to lay it all on the line to participate in a big event. Because ideally, it would be the contenders calling out the champion, yet here we see Jessica Tuti Bopp is calling them out. Either of them, both of them, or the winner of their fight, because in case you're not already aware, Marlene Esparza and Senicia Estrada are both rivals. So it's conceivable that at least one scenario, at least one, could see Marlene fighting Senicia and the winner of their fight fighting Jessica Tuti Bopp. But that's not the only scenario, because Marlene Esparza just so happens to be on the comeback trail. She recently made an addition to her family. She gave birth. So she's already given birth, and she's going through the motions to reintegrate herself into the sport of boxing. She's getting back in the mix of things. Meanwhile, Senicia Estrada has been kicking ass, taking names, and keeping busy. So another scenario, along with the first, yet another scenario, is we could see Senicia Estrada challenging Jessica Tuti Bopp for her WBA light flyweight title. That would be the first full version of a title that Senicia Estrada will fight for as a professional. Now, given the styles of all three of these fighters, Marlene, Senicia, Jessica, given the styles of all three of them, it's almost a guarantee that no matter how the cookie crumbles, whichever one of them fights the other first, you're going to get a firefight. You are guaranteed to get an action fight, because neither of the three, not a single one of them, is a chess player. They are all three of them high volume, high octane fighters. They are punchers.
All of them!
Their implementation might have subtle differences. You know, they all got their own version of in and out game. They all have their own version of offense, but all of them are offensively minded fighters. So regardless of who fights who first, you're guaranteed to get a great fight. But I'm of the opinion that since Marlene Esparza is the one that's on the rebound, she's the one that's on the comeback trail, it's more likely that you could see Senicia Estrada fighting Jessica Bopp. And given that Senicia Estrada is promoted by Golden Boy Promotions, it's also conceivable that if Senicia has that fight with Jessica and it's for the WBA title, you might just be able to catch it right there on DAZN. Lest we forget, Golden Boy's new home is DAZN. You know, I mean, I don't know how you guys could have forgot that, but you know, stuff happens, people got busy schedules, whatever. Point being, I like the way things are shaping up in the light flyweight division. And in one of my previous videos, I talked about how Senicia Estrada, at least in my humble opinion, she looks ready. She looks like a world beater. She looks like she could be a world champion in the making. And the next fight I'd like to see her in is a title fight. I think she's developed gradually into one of the most dangerous fighters in the light flyweight division. And I think she deserves a chance to show her shit against Jessica Bopp, the WBA light flyweight champion. And not just the light flyweight champion, but the most dangerous of all the light flyweight champions, who sports a professional record of 35 wins, 16 knockouts with only one loss. And that loss having happened many, many years ago in 2013. Since that time, she's won 11 consecutive fights, and currently, she's won her last 3 fights by way of technical knockout. She is the most accomplished, the most seasoned, and the most veteran, the most experienced of all the light flyweight champions in the entire division. She is the most adept to the task of taking on the dangerous young up-and-comers in the light flyweight division. So I'm looking forward to seeing either Marlene or Senicia challenge Jessica for her WBA title. And finally, Eddie Hearn had this to say: Wilder to DAZN is the only way the fight gets done. The fight being the Anthony Joshua undisputed heavyweight title fight. You'll notice that much of what you're hearing now is much more positive, much more progressive than what you were hearing before. And it's mostly because, well, quite honestly, it involved 2 teams that are very much at odds with each other. Whereas now, the change in negotiations is John Skipper, the executive chairman of DAZN. He is functioning now as the middleman to see the fight get made. But I want to make you guys aware of something that needs to be addressed. That if the last set of negotiations went the way that they did, it's because the 2 teams want very different things out of the situation. And that what we saw in the first set of negotiations was that while the focus of Eddie Hearn and all his efforts, the focal point of all his attempts was to get the fight made, the same can't be said for Team Wilder.
That's not what they were after.
That their focus and their aim was something very different from what his aim was. His aim was to create an environment where the fight can happen, whereas their aim was to use the fight itself as leverage to line their pockets. And you've got to put your thinking cap on and realize that that is not the same thing. Because what Team Wilder was willing to do was forego the fight and forego negotiations altogether until they
cash in,
be offered the kind of money that they were looking for. It wasn't about getting the fight made so that you can become one name, one face, one champion, Deontay Wilder. It wasn't ever about that. It was more about lining their pockets than actually getting the fight done. And that's why John Skipper can intervene in a way that Eddie Hearn can't. Because it's not Eddie Hearn's job to line Deontay Wilder's pockets. If it were his job to line anybody's pockets, it would be Anthony Joshua's pockets, not Deontay Wilder's. But that's very much what Team Wilder was looking for him to do. And if that's the situation where he's looking to make the fight and you're just looking to line your pockets by using the fight as leverage, you're never going to reach a middle ground. You're never going to reach a point to where you guys can hash out a deal. You'll notice that what's going on right now and the kind of talks that are going on right now don't just involve an Anthony Joshua fight. It's not just about that. I mean, as far as Eddie Hearn is concerned when it comes to Deontay Wilder, as far as he's concerned, the only interest in dealing with Deontay Wilder is getting the Joshua fight done. Whereas the talks that are floating around right now in regards to John Skipper, Deontay Wilder, and his team, these set of talks involve something like a two-fight deal. Something that isn't necessarily limited to an Anthony Joshua fight. You see, it's almost like Team Wilder's idea of negotiations, what are agreeable terms for negotiations, is for Eddie Hearn to pay them as if they've already beaten Anthony Joshua. It's almost like that's what they were looking for. That you want to get paid like you beat this guy already before you even fight him. They want to be on equal footing, on par with Anthony Joshua, knowing full well that they fight for less money on a regular basis than he offered you all those months ago. So if you normally fight for less money than what they're offering you on a regular basis, then what the fuck you acting so bougie for? Don't you want to fight this guy? What I want you guys to understand as you walk away from this video is that if John Skipper can intervene and negotiate a situation in a way that Eddie Hearn couldn't, it's because John Skipper's angle might be, I want to get Wilder over to DAZN, and I'm willing to incentivize a situation for him. Whereas Eddie Hearn's angle is, I want to get the fight made.
That's it!
And what truly appeals to Wilder and his team is not the fight itself. It was never about the fight. They were just using the fight as leverage to line their pockets. I.e., they were stalling the whole time for more money.